A tourist threw trash at a royal guard, but the joke ended with an arrest and jail time. What went wrong?
Be sure to subscribe to the channel and let's promote respect for the royal guard together. Let the whole world see how many of us there are.
London woke up, as always, with majestic serenity. The morning sun cast its rays over the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, making them glisten like precious jewels. The square in front of the palace was already filling with tourists eager to witness the legendary changing of the guard. Cameras clicked, children's laughter echoed, and the soft murmur of excited voices created an almost festive atmosphere. At his post, standing motionless, was James Harding. A young, tall, and imposing guardsman, James looked like he had stepped right out of a painting. His impeccably pressed scarlet uniform with golden buttons sparkled in the sunlight, and his towering bearskin hat commanded respect. James's face was stone-like, his gaze fixed forward as though he was oblivious to the crowds and dozens of cameras pointed at him. Years of service had taught him to embody discipline and calm, even in the face of daily provocations. Amid the crowd, one man stood out. A disheveled-looking man in his 40s wearing a wrinkled tracksuit seemed entirely out of place. This was Mark Jeffries, a tourist from the United States. His loud voice, exaggerated gestures, and smug grin immediately drew attention. In one hand, he held an open trash bag filled with leftovers, plastic bottles, and other garbage he had seemingly picked up on his way from the hotel. "Look at them, the famous royal mannequins. They can't even blink," he declared loudly, pointing mockingly at James. His comment elicited a few strained smiles from the crowd, but most people tried to distance themselves from him. Mark was clearly enjoying himself. His expression blended mockery with defiance as he stepped closer to the barricade, right up to the guardsman's post. James's gaze remained steady, not even flickering. His posture was so flawless it seemed almost unreal to Mark. "Are you even human? Or are you a robot?" Mark shouted, squinting at him. His words were loud and brash, cutting through the general hum of the crowd. The crowd began whispering among themselves. People exchanged uneasy glances, and some started pulling out their phones to record the unfolding scene. Among them was a young woman dressed in a formal dark dress. Her face showed clear disapproval as she stepped closer to Mark. "Excuse me, but this is completely unacceptable," she said quietly but firmly. Mark scoffed as if her words carried no weight. He raised the trash bag higher, drawing more attention to himself. "What if I throw this? Would you move then, huh, mannequin?" he shouted, addressing James directly. The guardsman's stoic demeanor seemed to infuriate Mark even more. His mocking grin briefly gave way to a flicker of anger. James stood there, as still as ever, as if he hadn't heard a word. Yet, something in his unwavering gaze hinted at an internal struggle, the difficulty of maintaining such composure. Meanwhile, the tension in the crowd was growing. People stepped back, forming a small circle around Mark and the guardsman. Someone in the audience whispered, "This is too much. Someone should stop him." But Mark only grew bolder. He basked in the attention, like an actor reveling in the spotlight. His smirk widened, his confidence swelling with every passing second. "Listen, what if I put this bag over his head? I wonder, would he react then?" Mark yelled, his voice carrying a clear challenge, not just to the guardsman but to everyone watching. The crowd froze, anticipating what would happen next. James, standing motionless, maintained his composure, but the air around him was thick with tension. With each of Mark's taunts, the situation became more charged. What had started as a peaceful morning was rapidly spiraling into something far more dramatic. It seemed as though any moment now the tranquil day at Buckingham Palace would turn into the epicenter of an unforgettable spectacle. The crowd in front of Buckingham Palace seemed to freeze in tense anticipation. Every move Mark made, every mocking shout, seemed to intensify the situation. His loud voice echoed across the square, forcing everyone nearby to turn their heads. "Hey, what's the deal? Standing there like a statue? Maybe this little gift will help wake you up," he yelled, swinging a trash bag so recklessly that its contents nearly spilled out. Mark appeared to be playing the villain in his own twisted performance. He relished every second of attention, his smug grin growing wider. The trash bag, filled with leftover food and plastic waste, was held high above his head, and his eyes gleamed with mischief. He was determined to break the unwavering discipline of the guardsmen. James Harding, the guardsman on duty, stood motionless, as his role required. His face remained expressionless, though he felt the tension building around him. Years of service had trained him to withstand provocations, but Mark's behavior was testing limits he had never faced before. It was as if this man had no understanding of boundaries. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some tourists began stepping back, wanting to avoid becoming part of the escalating conflict. Others stayed put, their eyes glued to the unfolding drama. A well-dressed elderly man in a stylish hat frowned and muttered, "This is going too far. Someone needs to intervene." But Mark only became bolder. He stepped closer to the guard, stopping just inches from the barrier. The trash bag dangled perilously close to James, while Mark's grin took on an air of triumph, as though he had already won this invisible battle. "Look at him, not even blinking. What kind of job is this?" Mark shouted, turning toward the crowd as if seeking their approval. "You all think this is normal?" The murmurs swelled. Some shouted their disapproval at Mark, while others pulled out their phones to record the scene. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and every moment felt like a prelude to something bigger. "Stop it! That's enough!" called out a young woman in a blue coat, her voice filled with indignation. "Don't you realize this is disrespectful?" Mark waved her off dismissively, his confidence unshaken. "Oh, come on," he smirked. "It's just a joke. Royal Guards are people too, right?" Raising the bag even higher, Mark acted as if he was about to throw it. The crowd gasped and someone yelled, "This is crossing the line! Stop him!" Yet no one moved. Everyone was frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, with a cocky grin, Mark made his move. He tilted the trash bag over the barrier, spilling its filthy contents toward the guardsman. The bag struck James's shoulder with a dull thud, and the mixture of liquids and grime stained the bright red of his uniform, leaving dark, ugly streaks. The crowd collectively gasped. In the stunned silence, a sharp voice cried out, "That's assault! Someone call the police!" Mark, standing just feet away from the guardsman, looked even more pleased with himself. His grin widened and he gloated. "Well, what now? Bet you can't ignore me now, huh?" James didn't move. His face remained stoic, but a flicker of tension betrayed the effort it took to maintain his composure. His jaw tightened slightly, and his icy gaze bore into Mark with a weight that words could never convey. It was a look that could cut through stone. Around them, the crowd stirred into action. Some rushed forward, trying to assist the guardsmen, while others turned their fury on Mark, shouting at him to stop. From the sea of people emerged the tall figure of a Royal Guard officer. His sharp, dark uniform and piercing gaze commanded immediate attention. He marched toward Mark with purpose, his voice cutting through the commotion. "Step away from the barrier immediately." Mark turned, smirking as if the situation were still under his control. "Step away? For what? For bringing your statue to life? Relax, it's all in good fun." The crowd held its breath. What had started as a pleasant morning at Buckingham Palace had morphed into a spectacle of disrespect and defiance, one that teetered on the edge of chaos. The atmosphere in front of Buckingham Palace was thick with tension. After Mark's brazen act, silence hung over the square, broken only by the whispers of the crowd and the hum of phone cameras capturing every moment. Amid the chaos, James remained a pillar of discipline. Though his face stayed impassive, the grime dripping from his uniform onto the pavement was a stark reminder of the insult he had just endured. Inside, he wrestled with a storm of emotions: anger, humiliation, and frustration. His training demanded restraint, but his humanity yearned for justice. Mark stood a few steps away, reveling in his perceived victory. "Come on, admit it," he taunted. "I made your day a little more interesting, didn't I?" The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. A young couple whispered to each other nearby. "This is outrageous," the woman said. "How can he act like this?" "He has no respect at all," the man replied. A voice from the crowd finally broke through the tension. "You can't do that. It's disgusting." But Mark remained unfazed, his grin fixed in place. He seemed to feed off the crowd's outrage, as though it validated his actions. Then the officer arrived. His deliberate steps and unflinching gaze silenced the crowd. When he reached Mark, his voice rang out, firm and unwavering. "Sir, you have just committed an assault against a member of the Royal Guard. This is unacceptable. You are under arrest." The words landed like a thunderclap. The crowd erupted into whispers and exclamations. "Finally, he deserves this," someone shouted. Mark's grin faltered. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. "Arrested? For what? Come on, it was just a joke," he stammered, taking a step back. The officer stood his ground, unmoved. "Your actions were deliberate, disrespectful, and a violation of the law. They will not be tolerated." 2 guards approached to escort Mark away. The crowd parted to make way, and as the guards firmly gripped his arms, Mark began to resist. "Hey, wait, you can't be serious. It was just coffee." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The crowd, now firmly against him, shouted its approval as he was led away. "Serves him right. That'll teach him some respect." Meanwhile, James stood silently, his gaze fixed on the commotion. Though he remained stoic, there was a quiet dignity in his posture that resonated with everyone watching. The morning that began with peaceful admiration of tradition ended as a stark reminder that the Royal Guard is not just a tourist attraction, but a symbol of honor and discipline deserving of respect. The crowd in front of Buckingham Palace was buzzing with emotion. Some were shouting in support of Mark's arrest, while others stood silent, stunned by what had just happened. At the center of it all was the tourist who, moments ago, was basking in his triumph, but now looked confused and panicked. Mark struggled against the officers of the Royal Guard security team. His voice trembled as he tried to maintain a facade of confidence. "It was just a joke! You can't seriously arrest me over a trash bag! This is ridiculous!" The officers, however, were unyielding. 2 men in sharp uniforms held Mark firmly by the arms, leaving him no room to resist. Their faces were focused and stoic, treating the incident like any other serious assignment. "You have assaulted a member of the Royal Guard while they were performing their official duties," one officer announced with a firm and authoritative tone. "Your behavior is unacceptable and will be investigated." Mark began to panic. His loud attempts at justification sounded increasingly pitiful. "This is a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. It was just a bag. You don't get it. It's all part of the show." The crowd that had gathered to watch the spectacle reacted with mixed emotions. Some cheered and shouted words of approval. "Serves him right. Finally, someone put him in his place. The guards deserve respect, not mockery. Well done." Others, however, hesitated, questioning whether the response was too harsh. "Isn't this a bit much?" murmured a woman in sunglasses standing near the barricade. "It was just a trash bag. Maybe a fine would have been enough," added a man standing next to her. Yet the majority supported the security team's actions. People were pulling out their phones, recording every moment. The scene played out like a live drama. Cameras pointed at Mark, the officers, and the unflinching James, who remained still despite the recent assault. Nearby, paramedics examined James, who stood at attention. A woman in a green uniform with a professional expression dabbed his soiled uniform with a damp cloth, checking for any injuries. Her colleague, a young man with a sharp gaze, asked questions. "Are you feeling okay? Any burns?" James, standing as rigid as ever, gave a brief nod. "I'm fine. I'm ready to continue my duty." His composure and restraint only deepened the respect from the onlookers. For many, he was the embodiment of professionalism and resilience. Meanwhile, Mark was being escorted toward a police car. The officers handled him firmly but carefully, giving him no chance to escalate the situation further. Mark's face alternated between panic and anger. He glanced at the crowd, seemingly searching for someone to defend him, but all he encountered were disapproving stares and condemning remarks. "With jokes like that, he should have gone to a circus, not here," shouted a man in a cap. "What's wrong with people these days? No respect at all," added an elderly woman with a cane. As Mark was placed in the car, he tried to protest one last time. "You're all wrong. This is a misunderstanding. I'll file a complaint." But the door slammed shut, leaving him in silence. The crowd erupted into applause. Even those who had doubts about the arrest couldn't help but admire the precision and efficiency of the officers. James, though outwardly calm, felt a sense of relief inside. He knew that incidents like these were rare but always left an unpleasant mark. After ensuring his uniform was clean, he resumed his post. His figure against the backdrop of Buckingham Palace once again stood as a symbol of discipline and honor. The crowd began to disperse, but some lingered, discussing the incident. A man filming with his phone summed it up. "Today's events are a reminder to everyone that tradition and respect are more important than any joke." The story that unfolded outside Buckingham Palace became a viral sensation within hours. Tourists who had been present uploaded videos of the incident to social media, and clips of Mark Jeffries throwing a trash bag at a royal guard quickly spread across the internet. Headlines were ablaze with shocking titles: "Tourist attacks Royal Guard with trash bag." "Disrespect or stupidity. Man throws trash at a guard." The videos captured everything: Mark's smug grin, his exaggerated gestures, James's impeccable composure, and the swift response of the security team. The crowd's reactions, gasps, murmurs, and applause as Mark was led away, were also caught on camera. These clips became the center of heated online discussions, sparking outrage and disbelief. In the comments, people shared their thoughts. "This is shameful. Who even thinks it's okay to act like this near the Royal Guard?" The guard is a true professional. He didn't even flinch despite the insult. "I hope this tourist gets what he deserves." Why do people think they can behave however they want when they're in another country? Some, however, tried to defend Mark. Maybe it was just a joke that went too far. Jail time seems excessive. A fine would have sufficed. Meanwhile, Mark was held at a police station, where he was interrogated and kept in custody until his court date. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he issued a public apology through his lawyer. "I did not intend to cause harm or disrespect. It was a foolish mistake. I deeply regret what happened and extend my apologies to the Royal Guard and anyone offended by my actions." The apology, however, only fueled the fire. Public opinion was already set, and many saw his statement as insincere. "You're only sorry because you got caught." Real apologies mean accepting responsibility, not making excuses. The incident made headlines not only online, but also in traditional media. Television channels invited experts and witnesses to discuss the event. This incident highlights how some tourists completely disregard cultural boundaries and traditions, said one etiquette expert. "The Royal Guard is not just a backdrop for photos. These individuals protect our nation and deserve respect," added another commentator. James Harding, the guard at the center of it all, became something of a hero in the public eye. Despite the humiliation and provocation, he remained steadfast in his duty. His colleagues publicly expressed their admiration, and his commander gave an interview. James demonstrated exemplary behavior. We are proud of his composure and professionalism. Support for James poured in. Online comments praised him. Thank you, James, for your service. A true professional. Incredible restraint. I couldn't have stood there so calmly in his place. As for Mark, his life took a sharp turn. He had expected the incident to blow over quickly, but each new headline only added to the public backlash. Memes featuring him flooded the internet. When you think you can mess with a guard but end up in jail instead of getting likes. The trash king of Buckingham Palace. Even his close friends and family began distancing themselves, embarrassed by his actions. Mark realized that his joke had far-reaching consequences, and with a court date looming, it was clear that his life would never be the same. This incident became a stark reminder that traditions, discipline, and respect are essential pillars of society, and those who disregard them may face far more serious consequences than they ever imagined. The trial of Mark Jeffries attracted nationwide attention. The courtroom was filled with journalists, witnesses, and even some tourists who had been present during the incident at Buckingham Palace. Cameras clicked, capturing every detail. Mark, dressed in a formal suit, looked disoriented. His former confidence had vanished, leaving only a shadow of the defiant tourist who had challenged the royal guard. The judge, an elderly man with gray hair and a steely gaze, opened the session. He listened intently as the prosecution presented undeniable evidence, videos recorded by tourists, eyewitness accounts, and medical reports confirming that Guardsman James Harding had sustained physical injuries from the incident. Mr. Jeffries, the judge began, his voice commanding respect. Your actions outside Buckingham Palace were not only a violation of public order, but a gross display of disrespect toward those who represent our country and its traditions. Mark attempted to defend himself. He rose to his feet, his voice shaking as he spoke. It was a mistake, a bad joke. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. But his words rang hollow. The prosecutor, an energetic man in his 40s with a sharp voice, quickly dismantled this line of defense. A bad joke? He repeated. Do you consider throwing a trash bag at a royal guardsman a joke? Then why did you continue provoking him even after being warned? The courtroom fell silent. The audience watched closely, hanging on every word. The prosecutor pressed on. Your actions were deliberate and intentional. You reveled in the attention, ignoring societal norms and cultural boundaries. Mark remained silent, his face pale. He realized there was no room left for excuses. Then Mark's attorney took the floor, trying to mitigate the situation by emphasizing his client's remorse. Your Honor, my client recognizes that his actions were unacceptable. He sincerely apologizes to the Royal Guards, Guardsman Harding, and anyone who may have been offended by his behavior. The judge, however, was unmoved. He turned to Mark and said firmly, Your apologies are noted, but they do not change the fact that you knowingly crossed the line. Your so-called joke humiliated a man who was performing his duty with honor and dignity. The judge then announced the verdict. Mark Jeffries, you are sentenced to 3 months in prison for disturbing public order and assaulting a member of the Royal Guard. This sentence is intended to serve as a lesson and a reminder that such behavior is unacceptable. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Some nodded in approval, and a few even clapped quietly. Mark, hearing the sentence, turned even paler. He opened his mouth to say something, but his words were drowned out by the collective buzz of the room. Security officers approached to escort him out, and the crowd parted to make way. Meanwhile, Mark's story continued to dominate social media and news outlets. Videos of the incident, his courtroom defenses, and the final verdict became hot topics of debate. Most people supported the court's decision. Finally, justice is served. Tourists can't act like this and expect no consequences. The royal guard deserves respect. This sentence sends the right message to anyone who thinks otherwise. However, some believed the punishment was too harsh. 3 months in jail for throwing trash? That's overkill. A fine would have been enough. Prison is too much. Guardsman James Harding, the victim of the attack, also spoke out. In an interview, he said, "We stand at our posts to protect the traditions and symbols of our country. I'm glad this incident reminded people that respect is the foundation of everything." Chun. When Mark's 3-month sentence ended, he was released from prison. He avoided the press and refrained from making any public statements. However, the public had not forgotten his actions. He remained a symbol of how a single act of disrespect could lead to severe consequences. This story became a lesson for all. Buckingham Palace, where tradition meets modernity, returned to its usual routines. But now, visitors to the square looked at the guards with greater respect, understanding that behind their stoic demeanor and discipline lay honor, strength, and extraordinary resilience.